Look at this. He's not scared of me. Hasn't moved an inch. Just looking. I've been walking through this forest for a while now, and he's been following me the whole time, like I'm just another tree that decided to move. That's the thing nobody tells you about the dodo. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't panicked. It wasn't hiding. It was just here, completely at home, in a world that had never given it a single reason to be afraid. Everyone thinks they know this story. The fat, stupid bird that was too dumb to survive. The punchline that became a word dead as a dodo. I used to think I knew it too. Then I started reading the actual records, the ship logs, the naturalist journals, the colonial documents that nobody talks about. And what I found was not that story at all. The dodo didn't go extinct because it was stupid. It went extinct because it was perfect for a world that no longer existed. And that world disappeared in 83 years. This is what really happened. 500 miles east of Madagascar, in the middle of the Indian Ocean, there is an island. It rose from the seafloor around 8 million years ago. Volcanic, isolated, surrounded by open water in every direction. For millions of years, nothing reached it except birds and seeds carried by wind. No rats, no snakes, no cats, no dogs, no humans. Just ocean, rock, and time. The island is called Mauritius, and for most of its existence, it was one of the most complete, self-contained ecosystems on the planet. The interior was covered in dense ebony forest, trees so old and thick their canopies locked together overhead, blocking the sun. The ground was soft with centuries of fallen fruit. Rivers ran clean from the central mountains to the coast. Giant tortoises moved slowly through the undergrowth. Giant skinks, lizards nearly 3 feet long, basked on the warm rocks. Fruit bats filled the trees at dusk, their wings spreading wide against the orange sky. And walking through all of it, unbothered, unhurried, completely at home, a bird unlike anything else on Earth. It was about 3 feet tall, gray-brown feathers, a large hooked beak, pale yellow at the tip, small useless wings folded against a heavy body, thick legs built for walking, not running. Scientists would later classify it as Raphis cucullatus. Everyone else would call it the dodo. Its ancestors had been pigeons. Millions of years ago, a population of pigeons, probably blown off course by a storm, landed on this island and never left. Over countless generations, something happened. They stopped flying, not because they lost the ability overnight, but because there was no reason to fly. Nothing on this island ate them. Nothing chased them. Nothing threatened a bird that stayed on the ground. Flight is expensive. It takes enormous muscle, hollow bones, a body shaped entirely around the act of leaving the earth. When that investment stops paying off, evolution quietly cancels it. The dodo's wings shrank. Its body grew heavier. Its legs thickened to carry the weight. It became, in every measurable way, the perfect ground bird for a predator-free island. 1 egg per year. Just one. That number matters. Remember it. 1 egg. The dodo nested directly on the soil. A simple construction, leaves, dry grass, whatever was available. It would sit with that egg for weeks, guard it, keep it warm. When the chick finally hatched, both parents stayed close until it could feed itself. It ate fallen fruit, seeds, roots, occasionally crabs and shellfish near the coast. It moved slowly. It had no reason to rush. It had no fear response to anything on land. This is the part people always get wrong. They read that the birds walked up to the sailors and let themselves be caught, and they call that stupidity. It wasn't stupidity. It was the logical result of 8 million years of living on an island where nothing wanted to eat you. The dodo had never learned fear because fear had never been useful. The island around it was just as precisely calibrated. The dodo was Mauritius's primary seed disperser. It swallowed large fruits, whole fruits with seeds too big for smaller animals to carry. Those seeds passed through the dodo and landed across the island, sprouting into the next generation of forest. Remove the dodo, and certain trees stop reproducing. Scientists have studied the tambalacoke tree, sometimes called the dodo tree, and found that its population collapsed around the same time the dodo disappeared. Some researchers believe the tree's seeds needed to pass through the dodo's digestive system to germinate at all. The bird and the tree had been locked in that relationship for so long that neither could survive without the other. This is what the word ecosystem actually means. Not just a collection of plants and animals living near each other. A system. Every part connected. Every part dependent. The island had been running that system without interruption for millions of years. Until 1598. The Dutch East India Company, the VOC, was not a government. It was a corporation, the first multinational corporation in history, some would argue. Founded in 1602, though Dutch ships had been sailing the Indian Ocean since the 1590s. Its mission was profit, specifically the profit of bringing Asian spices, nutmeg, cloves, pepper, cinnamon, back to European markets where they sold for fortunes. The route from Holland to the Spice Islands of Southeast Asia was brutal. Months at sea. Storms, scurvy, bad water, men dying in the hold. Ships needed resupply stations. Fresh water, fresh meat, somewhere to repair sails and rest the crew. Mauritius sat almost perfectly on the route. The first Dutch fleet to make deliberate contact arrived in September 1598. The admiral was Wybrand van Warwyk. His fleet of 8 ships had been at sea for months, and the men were exhausted. What they found when they anchored off the coast was almost incomprehensible. The island was full of life. Tens of thousands of birds, sea turtles nesting on the beaches, giant tortoises wandering to the water's edge, fish so dense in the shallows they could be scooped up by hand, and these large, gray birds walking along the shore, not running, not flying, just walking, as they always had, toward the strange new shapes that had appeared at the water's edge. The sailors came ashore and the dodos approached them, not because the birds were confused, not because they were incapable of moving away, but because in 8 million years of island history, nothing had ever given them a reason to retreat. The men grabbed them with their hands. Jacob van Neck, another Dutch captain who visited shortly after, wrote in his journal that the birds were so large that 2 could barely feed 100 men. He described them as walking toward the sailors without any fear. That phrase, without any fear, appears over and over in every early account. The Dutch called them walkvogel at first, disgusting bird. The meat was reportedly tough, oily, and hard to chew. But it was meat, and it didn't run. For exhausted sailors who had been eating hard biscuits and salted fish for months, it was enough. The hunting began immediately, not as a campaign, not as a policy, simply as the natural reflex of hungry men who had just discovered an animal that would walk up to them and wait. They killed dozens at a time. They took them aboard in cages, some alive as curiosities for European collectors, some as living provisions for the voyage ahead. A few dodos actually reached Europe. At least one was exhibited in Amsterdam. Artists sketched them usually badly, emphasizing the belly, making the bird look rounder and more ridiculous than it actually was. Those images became the ones that survived. The fat, waddling, stupid bird. Not the real animal. The caricature. But here's where the story gets more complicated. Direct hunting by sailors was not what killed the dodo. Not alone. Think about it. Ships stopped at Mauritius periodically. They killed what they could carry and sailed on. The island was enormous. The dodo population had surely been in the tens of thousands. A species doesn't disappear just from that. What killed the dodo was what came ashore that the sailors didn't notice. Rats. Every wooden ship in the 17th century was full of rats. Black rats, brown rats, they lived in the hull, in the cargo, in the rope stores. When a ship anchored offshore and sailors rowed to the beach, rats swam to the island. Nobody recorded this. Nobody cared. Rats were simply part of life on a ship. On Mauritius, they found a paradise. Nesting birds that had never learned to be wary. Eggs laid directly on the ground. No predators. Unlimited food. The rats spread across the island and ate. And because the dodo laid only 1 egg per year, and that egg sat in an open nest on the forest floor, the impact was catastrophic and nearly invisible at first. Each rat that found a dodo nest didn't just take a meal. It canceled a year of reproduction for that bird. The Dutch established a permanent colony on Mauritius in 1638. This changed everything. Before, ships had come and gone. Now people stayed. They cleared forests for farms and buildings. They brought livestock, cattle, pigs, goats, and released some to breed freely in the interior as a living food reserve for future ships. The pigs went feral. They rooted through the undergrowth with extraordinary efficiency. They ate tubers, roots, fallen fruit, everything the dodo depended on. And when they found nests, they ate those too. The colonists also brought macaques monkeys, which had a particular talent for finding eggs in trees and on the ground alike. They brought cats and dogs, which went feral in turn. In the span of a few decades, the island that had contained no land predators for millions of years was suddenly full of them. The dodo didn't know how to hide an egg. It didn't know how to build a nest in an inaccessible place. It had never needed to. Those instincts had been unnecessary for so long that evolution had quietly let them go just as it had let go of the wings. The colonists themselves kept hunting too. The meat was still not popular. Most records suggest it was eaten out of necessity, not preference. But necessity was common enough, and there was no limit, no rule, no one counting the birds. The VOC's official records from this period show almost no interest in the dodo at all. There are pages about ebony shipments, pages about the amber harvested from sperm whales, pages about the enslaved people brought from Madagascar to work the colony. The dodo appears occasionally, almost as an afterthought. That indifference is part of what makes this story so devastating. Nobody decided to exterminate the dodo. Nobody gathered and said, let's eliminate this species. It happened the way most extinctions happen, through 100 small decisions, none of which seemed significant at the time. By the middle of the 17th century, sailors were beginning to report that the birds were becoming harder to find. Where once they had crowded the shoreline, now you had to go inland. Where once they had come to you, now they scattered or tried to, on legs not built for speed. The fear response the dodo had never needed was now desperately necessary. But evolution doesn't work on a timeline of decades. The damage being done to the population, the egg losses, the habitat destruction, the direct hunting was outpacing the bird's ability to recover. With only one egg per year, every lost nest was a year of population growth erased. The numbers were collapsing, quietly, without announcement. The last confirmed written record of a living dodo was made in 1681. A Dutch sailor named Benjamin Harry included it in his journal almost in passing, a note about the island's remaining wildlife as his ship resupplied. After that, nothing. No record of a sighting, no record of a hunt, no record of a dead specimen, just absence. And here is what I need you to understand about that absence. Nobody noticed. There was no moment of recognition. No entry in any log that said the birds are gone. No report sent back to Amsterdam. No naturalist raising an alarm. The last dodo died sometime around 1681, possibly a few years earlier, possibly a few years later. It died somewhere on that island in a forest that was already thinning, surrounded by an ecosystem that was already unraveling. It may have been killed by a pig, by a rat finding its nest one final time, by a sailor who didn't know or care that there were no others left. We don't know. We will never know. The world's first documented extinction in the modern era passed without a single person noticing it had happened. The Dutch abandoned the colony in 1710, 29 years after the last dodo sighting. They had taken what they needed, ebony, ambergris, labor, and left when the returns diminished. The French arrived in 1715 and renamed the island. They brought more settlers, more animals, more clearing of the remaining forest. The giant tortoises lasted a few more decades. The giant skinks, the flightless rails, the blue pigeon, one by one, species that had evolved in isolation over millions of years, were erased in a span of time that barely registers in geological history. For over a century after its extinction, the dodo was not taken seriously as a real animal. Travelers who mentioned it in their journals were mocked. Scientists who tried to reconstruct it from the few existing bones were working from almost nothing. Most specimens had been lost or discarded. In 1865, a chemistry teacher in Mauritius organized a dig at a marsh called the Mer aux Songes. His workers pulled up thousands of dodo bones, the most complete picture of the animal that science had ever seen. For the first time, people could look at a real skeleton. The dodo was not obese. It was not disproportionate. It was a well-built ground bird, adapted with extraordinary precision to its environment. The fat, stupid image that had been circulating for 2 centuries was wrong. It had always been wrong. In 1859, Charles Darwin published On the Origin of Species. 2 years later, the phrase dead as a dodo was already in common use in English, a shorthand for something so obviously failed that it deserved to be forgotten. The culture had absorbed the extinction and turned it into a punchline. It was easier that way. If the dodo was clumsy and absurd, its disappearance was almost natural, almost inevitable, almost its own fault. That version of the story let everyone off the hook. But the science tells a different story. The dodo had survived for millions of years in conditions that would have been fatal for most species. It had built a complete life, a feeding strategy, a reproductive system, a relationship with its ecosystem, without any of the tools we associate with survival. No speed, no camouflage, no venom, no aggression. It didn't need them. It needed one thing, for its world to stay the way it was. And that is the one thing no species can ever guarantee. Today, scientists use the dodo as a reference point for what they call island naivety, the tendency of species that evolved in isolation without predators to show no fear response to new threats. The same pattern appears on every island where humans have arrived for the first time. Hawaii, New Zealand, the Galapagos, Madagascar. Species that had lived in balance for millions of years encountering, in a single generation, something their evolution had never prepared them for. In New Zealand, the moa, a flightless bird, even larger than the dodo, disappeared within a century of human arrival. In Hawaii, more than half of all bird species have gone extinct since humans reached the islands. The pattern does not change. What changes is how fast it happens and whether anyone is paying attention. There is a tree in Mauritius called the Calvaria, also known, sometimes, as the dodo tree. It produces large seeds inside a hard casing. For millions of years, those seeds were swallowed by dodos, softened in the digestive process, and deposited across the island in the bird's droppings. After 1681, the tree stopped reproducing at the same rate. By the 1970s, there were fewer than 14 Calvaria trees left on the island, and all of them were estimated to be over 300 years old. No new trees for 300 years. An ecologist named Stanley Temple proposed that the seeds could only germinate after passing through the dodo's digestive system. He fed the seeds to turkeys as a substitute and managed to sprout a few saplings. The tree still exists, just barely, but the relationship is gone. The dodo is gone. And the forest that built itself around that bird is still trying to figure out how to continue without it. 83 years. That's how long it took. From 1598, when the first Dutch sailors stepped onto that beach, and the dodo walked toward them just like he walked toward me, to 1681, when the last one disappeared. 83 years to erase something that had taken 8 million years to build. Nobody planned it. Nobody wanted it. It happened in the space between 100 decisions that each seemed small enough to ignore. The dodo became a symbol of extinction, but also, somehow, a symbol of stupidity, of failure, as if the bird had done something wrong by not surviving. I want you to take something different away from this. The dodo was not a failure. It was a success for millions of years in conditions perfectly suited to what it was. It was only a failure in a world it had never been built for. And nobody warned it that the world had changed. If this story stayed with you, subscribe. There's a lot more history that deserves to be told right. We'll see you in the next one.